Good afternoon. Welcome to this webinar. This is a webinar on the National Science Foundation's Improving Undergraduate STEM Education Program, which is housed in the Education and Human Resources Directorate at the National Science Foundation. We have two presenters today. My name's Ellen Carpenter, and I'm a Program Director in the Division of Undergraduate Education at the National Science Foundation.
And I'm Andrea Nixon, also a Program Director with the National Science Foundation.
So our webinar today is going to be a focus specifically on proposals that are being prepared and submitted for Level 1 and for capacity building. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means as we get further into the presentation. This is a program that has an impending deadline. The deadline is August 4th. So I think folks are eager to get some information on what needs to go into proposals for that particular deadline. And as a reminder, this is for proposals that are submitted in response to NSF Solicitation 19-601. By participating in this webinar, you're giving your permission to have your questions and comments recorded. There is a question and answer box, and we will have several opportunities during the course of the webinar to be able to answer your questions. Before we get started, I would like to draw your attention to the resources that are available to you as participants in this webinar. You have a little red button on your screen that will take you to a list of resources. There are several things available. There is a link directly to the program solicitation. There is an evaluation survey for this particular webinar, and we'll give you a couple of opportunities to fill in that survey as we proceed through the program today. The resources button also will provide you with a link to past webinars. This is the, I believe, fourth in a series of webinars that we've hosted for the IUSE program. So all of the prior ones have been archived via AAAS, and they're available to you through that resources button. I would like to point out that today's webinar is also being recorded, and it will be archived. It will probably be available sometime next week, and so a link to that webinar will also appear on the same website once it's available. And the final resource that you have available to you is the Improving Undergraduate STEM Education Program homepage that lists some relevant information about the program and what you can find on that program within the programs, contact information, other important things like that, lists of frequently asked questions, and other information you may find helpful as you're trying to find out things about the IUSE program. So the question that I'd like to focus on for just a second is to wonder what all of you would like to do. So there are quite a few people listening to this particular webinar. I think we had over 900 registrants, so that creates quite an audience. We would hope that you would like to do things like improve undergraduate students' performance and retention in STEM courses and majors. Perhaps you're interested in increasing participation of women and students from underrepresented groups, again in STEM courses and majors. Are you interested in preparing students to enter the STEM workforce? Or are you interested in increasing faculty engagement with their STEM teaching? And hopefully all of you are interested in making your institution a better place for STEM teaching and learning. If those are your interests and your goals, then please stay tuned, because this is an opportunity to learn about a program that can help you achieve some of these goals. We're going to do a couple things today. We will provide you initially with an introduction to the Improving Undergraduate STEM Education Program. We'll give you an opportunity to brainstorm for just a minute to think about what you would like to do and why this program is of particular interest to you. Some of you may already have projects in preparation. Others may just be thinking about the types of things that you might be interested in doing with support through this particular program. So we'll give you an opportunity to think about those things. We'll talk a little bit about program organization. We have several different tracks, and within each track we have several different levels, and we'll tell you what those tracks and levels mean. We'll also talk about workshop and conference submissions, which can also be submitted to this particular program with the interest of supporting STEM teaching and learning. We'll talk about expectations for the program, what we'd like to see in the projects that we are supporting. We'll talk about how proposals are reviewed. NSF uses two merit review criteria. They are intellectual merit and broader impacts. We'll provide some resources to you that might be helpful as you're crafting your proposal and thinking about the components of your particular proposal. And at the very end, we have a set of slides that might be helpful for those of you who have never prepared a proposal before. If we have time, we will go through those slides and they can provide some useful pointers about how to put together a proposal, the kinds of things that are looked for in the review process, and what actually happens to a proposal once it is submitted to the National Science Foundation. As I mentioned earlier, the webinar will include several chances for you to ask your questions. You have a question box on your platform in which you can type your questions. I would ask that you please only enter your question once. We actually have someone who's going to be helping us prioritize questions to be answered. And so we will try to answer as many questions as we can that we feel are of general interest to the broadest segment of the audience today. We realize that there will be lots of questions, and we apologize, but we're simply not going to have time to answer everything, but we'll try to answer to the best of our ability, the ones that we think will be of interest to the largest number of folks in the audience today. So the first part of the webinar is an introduction to the IUSE program. The IUSE program hopes to do a couple of things. The major goals of the program are to improve the quality and effectiveness of the education of undergraduates in all STEM fields, and also to improve undergraduate STEM teaching and learning for all students and/or the institutional environment in which they occur. And by all students, I mean students participating in STEM classes or in which STEM content is part of their coursework. This doesn't necessarily refer to STEM majors, but many students engage in STEM education as part of their undergraduate career. And as a reminder, undergraduate students are those that would be enrolled at 2-year or 4-year institutions of higher education. Undergraduates do not include K through 12 students, and they typically do not include graduate students or students beyond their first baccalaureate or associate degree. Proposals are accepted from all types of United States-based institutions of higher education, as well as from professional societies, organizations, and other entities whose work represents those institutions and which support the goals and mission of improving undergraduate STEM education. The IUSE program has been in existence for about, I guess it's 7 or 8 years now, and we've made a number of awards. We have provided funding to both public and private institutions, as well as to nonprofits and to business or industry, either direct funds or through partnerships with other projects that have been funded through the IUSE program. The types of institutions we fund award a number of different types of degrees. Many of the institutions award degrees up as high as a doctorate. Some of them are master's degree granting institutions. Some simply award a bachelor's degree, and some award only associate's degrees. And some of the institutions that we fund are non-degree granting, or I should say some organizations. These would typically be things like professional societies and other organizations that have a vested interest in improving undergraduate STEM education. So now it's a chance for you to think about what you might like to do and how that might fit within the parameters and goals of the IUSE program. We're going to give you about 2 minutes, and I'm actually going to set a timer for 2 minutes. And during that 2-minute interval, I'd like you to do just a little bit of brainstorming on your own. So think about what you've been longing to do to improve undergraduate STEM education. And again, this could be a project that you've worked on for a long time. This could be a brand new project that's just percolating, or if you're brand new to the NSF and to the IUSE program, an opportunity to think about things that you might like to do. So we'd like for you to write down a couple of things that you've been wanting to do that could help improve STEM teaching or learning, to look at those ideas and perhaps pick one that's very compelling to you. And then think a little bit about what it would take to implement your idea. Would it take money, people, collaborators who have expertise that you don't have, resources, anything like that? So think about what it would take to actually get your idea moving, and then keep your idea in mind as a target for a potential IUSE proposal. If you would like to briefly state your ideas, you can use the chat or question box. And I'm going to start my timer now, and we're going to give you 2 minutes. Okay, you've got about 30 seconds left. Okay, according to my Apple phone, you are done. So thanks very much for participating in your brainstorming activity. And we'll move next into a little bit of discussion about the organization of the IUSE program. The IUSE program actually features two separate tracks. They are the Engaged Student Learning track and the Institutional and Community Transformation track. And within each of those tracks, there are multiple levels of funding and several different deadlines that you'll need to pay attention to as you're planning a potential application. So the program tracks are Engaged Student Learning and Institutional and Community Transformation, as I mentioned. The rough overview of these two tracks is that Engaged Student Learning focuses on the development, testing, and use of teaching practices and curricular innovations to engage students and help to improve their learning, persistence, and retention in STEM. The Institutional and Community Transformation track, on the other hand, seeks to aid in the transformation of colleges and universities to implement and sustain highly effective STEM teaching and learning practices. So one focuses more at the student level and one focuses more at the institutional level. Here's a brief overview of what those two different tracks look like. So as I mentioned, Engaged Student Learning is interested in increasing engagement and learning through new tools, resources, and models, and also generating knowledge about how students learn and how to best approach their STEM learning. Within the Engaged Student Learning track, we have three different levels. Level 1 supports awards up to $300,000 for a term of up to 3 years. Level 2 supports awards from $300,000 to $600,000 for up to 3 years. And Level 3 supports awards from $600,000 to $2 million for up to 5 years. Level 1 has an impending deadline. The next deadline is August 4th, 2020. So the comments that we're making in today's webinar are particularly geared toward Level 1 submissions from Engaged Student Learning, as well as opportunities in institutional and community transformation. So institutional and community transformation is interested in spreading and scaling up evidence-based practices using a theory of change. And Andrea will talk a little bit more about a theory of change in a few slides, and particularly about generating knowledge about the organizational change process. For the August 4th deadline, there are two opportunities within this track. There is a capacity building opportunity, which would provide $150,000 for a single institution or $300,000 for several institutions collaborating together for up to 2 years. We're also accepting Level 1 submissions, which again are up to $300,000 and up to 3 years. All of those would be due by August 4th, 2020 as the next impending deadline. Institutional and community transformation also has a second level, and that features awards from $300,000 to $2 million for a single institution or up to $3 million for multiple institutions with an award term of up to 5 years. So the Engaged Student Learning track focuses on improving student learning, and this can be a direct focus on the students themselves, providing technology, for example, or testing different approaches to curriculum development, or indirectly through things like faculty professional development, training of teaching assistants, or other ancillary things that go into improving student learning. It also focuses on the development of improved instructional materials or methods, and hopes to engage students to improve learning and to increase retention in STEM as long-term goals of the program. There are a number of different approaches that can be thought about when one is considering an engaged student learning proposal. I'm providing some examples here, but please don't take these as limitations. There are certainly opportunities for almost anything that you can imagine that you think would help improve student teaching and learning or student STEM learning. So these can include things like development and implementation of novel instructional methods and technologies, design and assessment of metrics to measure how effective some of these things are, or different types of student outcomes, to engage in faculty learning through professional development to improve their teaching skills and their ability to improve student learning, to engage in discipline-based or interdisciplinary educational research that is student-focused, and a re-envisioning or adaptation of learning environments to focus on the students and more effectively promote their learning. Projects can also include co-curricular activities that increase student motivation and persistence in STEM, things like synthesis or meta-analysis of prior work, and collaborations between 2-year and 4-year institutions to develop innovative pathways for transfer and for student success. So lots of different things can constitute an engaged student learning project. The target populations for engaged student learning projects are undergraduate students. So these are students at 2-year and 4-year institutions of higher education. It can be STEM majors, either declared STEM majors, which typically are students, upper division students, we sometimes call them, perhaps in their junior and senior years of education, or undeclared, students who are just starting out on their higher education trajectory, who are perhaps interested in STEM but haven't yet committed to a STEM major. Target populations also include students whose course of study requires solid skills and knowledge of STEM principles. So they may not be in a STEM major, but they may need to do things like understand quantitative data and quantitative reasoning. And so those would be the types of skills that could be developed through an engaged student learning project. The projects can also focus on non-STEM majors who are seeking to fulfill a general education requirement in STEM, or on STEM faculty members to help them improve their ability to provide STEM education. And one particular component of engaged student learning is also a focus on pre-service STEM teachers in undergraduate teacher preparation programs. So this is training of future faculty for K-12 education who have to start as undergraduate students. And I would like to point out there are also several webinars archived on the AAAS website that are related to the NOISE program, which is also a pre-service teacher training opportunity. And they very specifically deal with preparing future teachers. So engaged student learning level 1 projects typically support early stage or exploratory research projects. They support projects that propose adaptation of existing pedagogies and methods in a novel environment or perhaps on a smaller scale. Proposals from a single institution can be appropriate, as well as proposals from partnerships across disciplines, institutions, or communities focused on a single unifying thematic approach or problem. Pilot data can certainly help a proposal, but is absolutely not required for one. A good idea and perhaps some very strong rationale and some reading of the literature might be a good way to start this type of project as well if you don't have any pilot data. I would like to point out there is a new opportunity for folks that are absolutely new to the Improving Undergraduate STEM Education program. So we have released a Dear Colleague Letter. It was actually released last December. It's under the number NSF 20-034, and the web link is here. You will have access to these slides if you go to the archived presentation later on, so you'll be able to figure out what the web link is there. But this Dear Colleague Letter encourages submissions of proposals from institutions that have not had prior funding from the IUSE program. This does not mean principal investigators that have not had prior funding, but institutions as a whole. Projects that are submitted in response to this Dear Colleague Letter can contribute to developing the STEM and STEM-related workforce, advancing a disciplinary STEM field, such as biology, chemistry, physics, mathematics, broadening participation in STEM, educating a STEM literate public, improving K-12 STEM education through undergraduate service, pre-service teacher preparation. Again, not a focus on K-12 students themselves, but on the teachers who will be teaching them. Projects can encourage lifelong learning or build STEM capacity in higher education. All projects, as all projects submitted to the IUSE program as a whole, are expected to increase knowledge about effective STEM education through posing and answering knowledge-generating questions. How does the program work? Is this effective for the students in question? Things like that. If one is interested in responding to this Dear Colleague Letter, we ask that you begin your proposal title with New to IUSE EHR DCL. That allows us to segregate these responses and to consider ways in which we can review them effectively.
The second track that's a part of the IUSE program is the Institutional and Community Transformation track, sometimes known as ICT. This focuses on improving evidence-based instruction by academic departments, institutions, and other organizations or communities, for example, scholarly communities. Supports efforts to build and understand systemic change in undergraduate STEM education, and aims to use appropriate theories of change to transform institutions. As Ellen mentioned earlier, in the resources section of this webinar, you can find a link to a prior webinar that Ellen and I did on November 13th of 2019 that focuses specifically on the institutional and community transformation. But for today, we'll give a high-level overview. So as Ellen indicated for the Engaged Student Learning track, the examples that we give here are not supposed to describe the limitations, but are just suggestive of the kinds of work that we've supported in the IUSE program. And for the institutional and community transformation track, examples might include the transformation of high enrollment classes to include evidence-based teaching practices, developing teaching evaluation rubrics that are rooted in a research-based framework, the development of faculty communities to improve accessibility or sustainability of evidence-based practices, or identifying best practices to guide institutional transformation itself, or the inclusion of non-tenure track faculty or instructors through policy or professional development opportunities. Or finally, the identification of common elements across disciplines, programs, institutions, or systems that support students from underrepresented groups to be successful in STEM. For a proposal to be successful in the institutional and community transformation track, it must describe the theory of change that is adopted. Some proposals have more than one, but this is a requirement of the solicitation. So if you're thinking of an ICT proposal, make sure that you have a theory of change. Make sure that it includes research literature and theoretical perspectives concerning change. This is because we recognize that STEM education, higher education, is a complex system. Changing institutions themselves and curricula and courses of study are complicated things to undertake. So that's the rationale and the purpose of theories of change and the importance of them in successful proposals. To promote institutional change, it may be important to include teams of faculty members, support from chairs, deans, and others within the institution's academic leadership, and perhaps support from provosts and presidents. So as Ellen mentioned earlier, there are two types of proposals for the ICT track. Level 1 proposals are designed to fund awards that are intended for early stage exploratory projects or small to mid-scale projects that build on prior work. You need not have pilot data, but that could be helpful. Projects should have a strong grounding in relevant literature, and those would be appropriate for this level of the program. The other kind of proposal type is relatively new. We've had one other round of proposals that were capacity building proposals. So the purpose of capacity building proposals are to enable institutions that have not had a prior institutional and community transformation award to identify and develop projects of interest. So your institution may have an Engaged Student Learning Award, prior award, and you would still be eligible for an ICT award of the community, or excuse me, of the capacity building type. Funding is intended to support activities such as assessing institutional needs, formulating departmental or institutional commitments, developing partnerships, identifying prior institutional efforts, gathering data, learning about relevant theories of change if that's something that's new to you or to your community, identifying relevant institutional practices, and formulating plans for advancing institutional or community transformation. Proposals are encouraged to include a variety of participants, so disciplinary and educational researchers, people who have expertise in assessment and evaluation. They can be incredibly helpful, all of those individuals, in helping to formulate research and evaluation plans, including institutional leaders. Funds associated with a capacity building proposal are intended to defray costs associated with coordinating among project participants, gathering or sharing data, convening and hosting working meetings for participants, and attending relevant meetings, such as we'll have an upcoming Principal Investigator Summit for the IUSE program. In keeping with the chart that Ellen showed earlier, capacity building proposals may be submitted by a single institution or as a collaborative project from 2 or more institutions. The maximum award for a single institution's proposal is $150,000, and the maximum for a collaborative project that is coming from 2 or more institutions would be $300,000.
Okay, and just as a reminder, here's the same little chart that we had up before. Let's go back to that quickly. Again, we have the 2 tracks. You've heard from Andrea about institutional and community transformation, and I gave you a little bit of information about the engaged student learning track. The impending deadline, August 4th, 2020, is for level 1 submissions to either of those tracks, as well as to submissions as capacity building programs to the institutional and community transformation track. We are planning a series of deadlines. We have talked about the impending August 4th deadline. If you're interested in a level 2 or a level 3 proposal, the next deadline for that would be December 1st, 2020, and the first Tuesday in December thereafter. And we also will have another deadline for the level 1 and capacity building proposals next February. This one says this past deadline, but there will be another one. It will be the first Tuesday in February of 2021. The IUSE program also encourages submission of workshops and conferences. So these can be submitted at any time and should be interested in addressing critical challenges in undergraduate STEM education. They can vary in size or scale. Typically, they'll include a budget somewhere between $20,000 and $100,000, again, depending on number of participants, intended length of the conference, intended audience, lots of different things like that. In order to think about putting together one of these workshops or conferences, proposers should consult an NSF program officer in the IUSE program before submission to determine appropriateness of the type of thing that you're thinking about. Program officer contact information is available on the IUSE program webpage, and as I mentioned, that webpage is available to you as one of the resources. You have a button for it as part of this webinar. We particularly encourage conferences and workshop proposals addressing diversity in STEM teaching and learning, and those involving collaborations of educational researchers and disciplinary scientists to ensure that STEM teaching reflects cutting-edge STEM disciplinary research. So those are a couple of ideas to think about. So we're going to pause at this point and take some of your questions. As I mentioned, we're not going to be able to answer all of the questions that you posed because already quite a lot of them are popping up in our window, but we'll try to answer a few here. And as I mentioned also, you may type in your questions into the question box. Please only type it once. We will do our best to answer as many questions as we can that we think are of general relevance to the audience. And we will reconvene on the other side and talk about program expectations. So the first question is about the new to IUSE DCL, whether one should submit the proposal to 19-601 or to 20-032 or 034. When you actually submit the proposal, you'll be choosing 19-601 because that's the parent program, but you need to reference the fact that you are submitting to the DCL by including in the title, new to IUSE EHR DCL, as the first few words in the title.
The second question is, should an IUSE EHR proposal have a separate proposed activities for broader impacts? Or is a discussion of how the main proposed work in the proposal meets broader impacts criteria in addition to the intellectual merit impacts would that be acceptable? The answer to that is the latter makes the most sense. So you don't need to have discrete activities that would address intellectual merit and broader impacts. It's important to address your overall project and describe it in terms of both intellectual merit and broader impacts. These are criteria that are used across the foundation and that we weigh evenly within the IUSE program.
And I will say we'll be talking a little bit more about what intellectual merit and broader impacts means in a later part of this webinar. Next question is, we are interested in increasing the number of K through 12 STEM teachers. Does IUSE support this type of initiative? Yes, we do, and it would be under pre-service teacher preparation. And the other thing that one might do is consider looking at the Noyce program, the Robert Noyce Teacher Scholarship Program, which also supports development of K through 12 STEM teachers.
The next question is, are community colleges proposals reviewed separately from four-year colleges and universities? The answer is no. We set up panels depending on, in some ways, the proposals that have come in some cases by the disciplinary areas, in other cases by the Dear Colleague Letter or whether they're capacity building. So we are not paneling proposals and they're not reviewed just based on institutional types, regardless of the type of institution.
Next question is, do all proposals have to directly improve undergraduate STEM education, or are more pure research proposals accepted, i.e. those that seek fundamental understanding of how undergraduates learn STEM with practical benefits to follow potentially? I would actually think that both of those would be ways in which you're improving undergraduate STEM education, seeking fundamental understanding or doing applied research in application and revision and remodeling of prior efforts, for example. So both of those would be appropriate approaches for the IUSE program. I mean, understanding how improving STEM teaching and learning can happen very directly, or it can happen somewhat indirectly. And so either of those two approaches would allow you to get there.
And if I could also add that we have a partner program, which is the EHR Core Research Program. That too funds foundational research. And if you have questions, this is Andrea speaking, about differentiating between the two, I'd be happy to talk to you. Next question. I run STEM education programs that are staffed by undergraduate students, but teach science in local underrepresented minority elementary schools. Would that construct be something that IUSE would fund? The IUSE program, so long as the project's focus is on the undergraduates, they could be engaged in curricular or co-curricular activities. Those activities could take place within the context of a classroom or when they're doing work within the larger community. So it's possible to construct a project that is centered on undergraduates working with students in elementary schools. But again, the focus would have to be on the undergraduate experience.
Okay, the next question is, should a collaborative research project be submitted under the Dear Colleague designation if one of the institutions or investigators has not had prior IUSE funding, but the other institution or investigator has had prior IUSE funding? The only way in which you could do that is if the lead institution has not had IUSE funding. So the project that is considered the lead would have to be the one that is new to the IUSE program. There's certainly no reason that you can't include a collaborating partner that's had some prior IUSE funding, and that actually might be argued as supporting your efforts in getting into this field of education research. So it's fine as long as the one that has not had the IUSE funding is going to be considered the lead. I'm going to suggest that we answer 3 more questions, and then we'll move on in our presentation.
Sounds good. The next question is the support of ESL Level 1 required in order to apply for an ESL Level 2 proposal? What are bigger differences except the scope? You do not need to have had an Engaged Student Learning Level 1 award to apply for Level 2. Rather, the project, the scope of the project, and the budget that's necessary to support the project should be right-sized. So I would encourage you, if you have a mid or large-scale project in mind and the budget range for level 2 is a better fit, to go ahead with that. In the reverse, if you have a mature project but it doesn't require significant sums of money, I would encourage you to look at the level 1 type of proposal as well.
Okay, so the next question is teaching professional development of graduate students as future faculty an appropriate target population for ESL? And the answer is yes, as long as, again, the project is focused on the outcomes affecting the undergraduate students. We've certainly funded a lot of projects that have looked at TAs, for example, and those are typically graduate students who are serving as instructors for undergraduate education. So by TA training, you're indirectly improving STEM teaching and learning of undergraduate students. So that type of activity is very appropriate, again, as long as the focus is on undergraduate instruction.
And the last question is, will the Dear Colleague Letter for Engaged Student Learning accept proposals in 2021? And the answer is yes. The Dear Colleague Letter is still available and will be into 2021.
Okay, and with that, let's go back to our presentation. We'll have another couple of opportunities to answer some more questions as we go through the rest of the webinar here. So we'd like to talk a little bit next about program expectations and what we really expect of awards that are made through the IUSE program. There are several major goals for the IUSE program. One of them is to build knowledge about STEM teaching and learning at the undergraduate level. So learning what works, what doesn't work, and perhaps developing novel, creative, and transformative approaches to undergraduate STEM teaching and learning. We're also interested in incorporating evidence-based teaching practices in STEM teaching and learning for all undergraduates. And this might be thought of as an adaptation goal, to bring in practices that have been tried in other places to adapt, improve, replicate them at your own institutions, and to include evidence-based practices in STEM teaching and learning in novel environments. And a third goal is to build and understand systemic change in undergraduate STEM education, to lay the groundwork for departmental, institutional, or community transformation and improvement in STEM teaching and learning. We expect that all IUSE proposals are going to increase knowledge about effective STEM education, and this can be through a number of mechanisms, one of which is posing one or more research questions that will be answered in the course of the project, or alternatively through evaluation of project activities, impacts, or outcomes to assess how an adaptation, for example, is faring with regard to the students that it is impacting. Successful IUSE proposals have a number of common features. Typically, they'll build on what is known, summarizing a published literature base and defining a starting point that can extend prior work in the field. So that really means doing a little bit of homework, reading what's happened before, and being ready to move forward in a direction based on what you've learned from what's already been done in the field. Projects typically will include a well-designed plan to gather data, a definition of what that data actually is, how it's to be gathered, and how it will be used, the methods of analysis that will be employed to answer the questions posed using the data that's been gathered. Projects need to include mechanisms to evaluate the success, and that should be in both formative and summative evaluation efforts. So understanding how to course correct if things go astray midway through the project, and also understanding what the outcomes are at the end of the project. Successful proposals will explain how findings and materials will be shared with the community, with others who are teaching the same discipline, or perhaps across disciplines or across institutional types. Proposals should address the sustainability of project efforts. We would like to see that awards that we make can be continued after the award term is over. So some eye to the future as to how those efforts can be implemented is helpful in creating a proposal that's very strong. Proposals often will collaborate as needed with other investigators, with institutions or communities in order to get the resources and expertise that are necessary to carry out the project as envisioned.
The methods of analysis are a key point that reviewers often hone in on. It's critical that you align the research or the evaluation methods with the questions that you're posing. That is to say that these research and evaluation methods will enable you to answer those questions effectively and authoritatively. Sometimes people assume that because we're the National Science Foundation that we're interested primarily in quantitative data, and that's not true. It'll be very important that you align the types of data that you're gathering, again, to answer the questions that you're posing, whether they're research questions or evaluation questions. So think about either qualitative, quantitative data, a mixture of both. But just make sure that the nature of the data that you're gathering well aligns with the rest of the project. Okay, we have a bit of a quiz. True or false? All proposals for the IUSE program must have a research component. True or false? False. All proposals must generate new knowledge, but you may have either a research plan, evaluation, or an evaluation plan. And frankly, as we were just saying, it's important to be able to evaluate all projects that are proposed. 2, STEM curriculum development, programmatic pathways, learning resources, assessment instruments, and faculty development may receive funding through the IUSE program. True or false? True. Question 3, proposals may focus on both STEM and non-STEM majors. True. Efforts to improve undergraduate STEM education for either or both is appropriate. Number 4, proposals may focus solely on students in a single discipline. True, as well as on multidisciplinary projects or interdisciplinary STEM education. Number 5, an evaluation plan that provides formative and summative assessment of the effectiveness of the project in achieving its goals is required. True. Question 6, proposals should demonstrate a solid grounding in relevant literature on STEM teaching and learning. I'm sure you all got that. True. Number 7, only colleges and universities may submit proposals. False. All categories of proposers in the PAPPG are eligible, including professional societies, companies, nonprofit organizations, and others. Okay, last one, multiple choice. Which of the following may receive IUSE funding? Proposals designed to use and build evidence about improved STEM instructional practices, investigate novel instructional tools or learning systems, including cyber learning, create, implement, and test program, curricular, course, and technology-driven models for STEM teaching and learning, develop, implement, and test creative approaches for adoption of educational research into disciplinary teaching, develop and validate assessment metrics for undergraduate STEM learning and instructional practice, propagate and sustain transformative and effective STEM teaching and learning through institutional practices or involvement of professional societies. All of the above.
Okay,
so
now
another round of questions.
Okay, maybe we should answer about 6 questions. How's that sound?
Okay.
All right, so question 1 is, would high school students taking dual enrolled courses be considered as students for an engaged student learning project? This is actually a question that comes up quite a bit. The answer typically is no. The students need to actually be enrolled at the degree granting institutions, preferably in a degree granting program. They certainly don't have to have had completed it, and there's nothing that says they can't switch in and out of that program, but to be considered an undergraduate student, they really do have to be enrolled at a 2-year or 4-year institution of higher education with the intent to get a degree from that particular institution. Dually enrolled students often will accumulate college credit and then take it to another institution, so they're really not effectively enrolled in the college as a whole.
I'm not sure I understand this next question, but I'll take a stab at it. Does dissemination of project results require evaluation by an independent evaluator if it is a major project objective, or can the PIs report to NSF on outcomes of dissemination activities? Typically in an annual report, PIs will be prompted to include descriptions of their dissemination. So whether that's journal articles, outreach, webinars, conferences, conference proposals, things like that. And so the evaluators don't typically, program evaluators don't typically evaluate the results, the dissemination efforts.
Okay, the next question is, would a community-based nonprofit that has developed an innovative program for preparing pre-kindergarten students for kindergarten level of math and has conducted some research on its impact and would like to validate the model further and potentially scale it, be new to IUSE DCL candidate? Again, the answer is no, and the reason for that is a focus on K through 12 students. We're interested in funding, and the program has limitations to fund undergraduate education. So efforts that are focused on K through 12 students as the primary focus are not appropriate for submission to the IUSE program, either through the whole program or through the new to IUSE DCL.
The next question, could you clarify if there's a difference between a logic model and a theory of change? That's a great question, because different fields use the phrase theory of change differently. What we mean in the IUSE program is that a theory of change should help you identify the component parts of a project that you need to make sure are in place for the project to be successful. They may refer to elements such as the organizational structure of the institution, the ways decisions are made at the institution. There may be cultural factors in play. And theories of change are designed to help you identify what are the component parts that you need to have in place for your project to be successful. And that's different and separate and apart from a traditional logic model for an evaluation plan.
Okay, the next question is regarding ICT capacity building. The implication seems to be that this is only for institutions that have not had any prior ICT awards. What if my department hasn't had an ICT award, but someone across campus on a completely unrelated project has had one of these awards? The capacity building really is for institutions as a whole that have not had prior ICT awards. So if someone else on the institutional campus has had an ICT award, then unfortunately that institution no longer qualifies as a new institution in capacity building. They would have already been considered as having had prior ICT funding.
And the sixth question is, are projects related to COVID-19 encouraged, discouraged, or is this neutral? As long as the project is sound, we would encourage you to submit it. And so if it is relating to undergraduate STEM education, certainly the landscape has changed quite a bit. And so that's certainly a viable topic.
Okay, let's go back to our presentation. So the next section is going to talk a little bit about the NSF merit review criteria. And so this is the lens that is applied to all proposals that are submitted to the National Science Foundation. The National Science Foundation as a whole uses two criteria. They are intellectual merit and broader impact. So intellectual merit is as phrased as follows. What is the potential for the proposed activity to advance knowledge and understanding within its own field or across fields? Basically, what will we learn from the work? So what are we actually going to learn from the study that's been proposed? And if the data are collected as the study proposes, what will we actually learn from that data? Broader impacts is what is the potential for benefiting society or advancing desired societal outcomes? And so that might be thought of as why is the work important to society? Who's going to benefit from this? And for educational projects, this is often quite easy to answer because the students that are participating in the classwork are going to be the ones benefiting from the work that's done, as well as future students that can take the findings that have been found from one project and have those applied into a number of different types of institutions through dissemination. So we'll take these two criteria independently and try to unpack them a little bit for you. So intellectual merit can actually, as we've said, it's what are we going to learn from the project? But there are a lot of different things that are considered when review panels are thinking about intellectual merit. So that when they're thinking about intellectual merit, we ask our review panels to think about the potential of the project to advance knowledge and understanding within its own fields or across different fields. We also ask about the potential of the principal investigator and the project team's capability to be able to actually conduct the work that's proposed and to generate the knowledge that they think will come out of the project. We ask reviewers to think about the resources available to the project and whether ones that will be needed to complete the project are actually in place. And this can include unfunded collaborations with other institutions or investigators who can provide expertise, access to facilities, different things like that. We ask reviewers to think about a clear plan. It's great to learn something from a project, but if one can't get from the objective of the project through to its end, it's really hard to see how anything would actually be learned. So a clear plan for what the project will do, who will do it, when it will be done, and why those things are necessary for completion of the project is very important as an aspect of intellectual merit. And in thinking about intellectual merit, we also ask that projects make sure that there is in place a mechanism to assess the success of the project attempts to advance knowledge. So how are we going to know if the project has actually worked? And this should also be a mechanism to provide feedback to the PI and team about possible course corrections that might be needed throughout the course of the project. The broader impact is the second criterion, and broader impact can encompass a lot of different things. So societally relevant outcomes may include, but certainly are not limited to, the list that I have here on the slide. And this includes things like full participation of women, persons with disabilities, and underrepresented or students from underrepresented backgrounds in STEM. Impacts can affect improved STEM education and educator development at any level. So again, undergraduate student training for K through 12 teachers or for those students who will eventually go on to professional or graduate school can also be a broader impact. One of the impacts could be increased public scientific literacy and public engagement with science and technology, and that includes improving the well-being of individuals in society. So we funded a number of projects that engage in community education. So undergraduate students in the course of their own learning also engage with their local communities, and that can really be thought of as increasing public scientific literacy and engagement with science. We hope that our projects will lead to development of diverse, globally competitive STEM workforce. And so this is another impact, so being able to train a diverse population of students to participate in the STEM endeavor. We hope that projects will lead to increased partnerships between academia, industry, and others. And this certainly doesn't have to be in every project, but it can be an aspect of some very successful projects. Broader impacts can also lead to improved national security, to increased economic competitiveness, and to enhancing the infrastructure for research and education. So as I said, it can take lots of different forms, but it's important to spell clearly in your proposal what you think the broader impacts are. Some of the other review considerations that we ask our reviewers to think about is to what extent do the proposed activities suggest and explore creative, original, or potentially transformative concepts. Some projects are very incremental, some are sort of groundbreaking, so we really ask reviewers to think about how those projects are structured. Again, we ask them to think about the plan for carrying out the proposed activities to make sure it's well-reasoned, well-organized, and based on a sound rationale. And also, does it incorporate a mechanism to assess success? We ask reviewers to think about the qualifications of individuals, teams, or institutions to conduct the proposed activities and whether there are enough resources available to the PI team, either at their home institution or through various collaborations, to carry out the proposed activities. There are a number of other components of a proposal, such as facilities, equipment, and other resources, a data management plan, mentoring plans for postdoctoral researchers, and sometimes supplementary documents. And so reviewers are also asked to consider those within the context of the proposal. And in the set of slides that we'll go through at the very end, for those new to NSF, we'll touch a little bit more on what the different components of a proposal are. So we have an opportunity for you to think a little bit about what a project might be in terms of intellectual merit or broader impact. And so I'm going to ask you to read this. Actually, I can read it, and to think about whether this is a reflection of intellectual merit or broader impact. So in addition to development and implementation of a novel curriculum, the project will include educational research to uncover new information about undergraduate model-based reasoning through detailed assessment of classroom learning. So in your eyes, would that constitute an example of intellectual merit or of broader impact? Most typically, reviewers that we've seen would classify this as intellectual merit. So we're uncovering new information through using one of the mechanisms for developing knowledge, detailed assessment of classroom learning. So that could be viewed as intellectual merit. And then this one. Activities planned will provide in-depth faculty development through a national series of workshops and an expansion of an ongoing national study of the effectiveness of this approach for learning about the nature of science. And so this might be construed perhaps as a broader impact. So it's really an attempt to provide information across the nation through a national series of workshops and to expand the study about the effectiveness. So hopefully disseminating information to a very broad population of instructors and STEM faculty. I do want to point out that the two statements that I showed you were taken from actual awards that we made. So these were parts of the abstracts of those awards. And so they really illustrate what is provided back to the National Science Foundation in terms of description of the project that is planned and how it will be conducted. Okay, so I guess we've got time for a few more questions here. Maybe another 6 questions. And I'll start with question 1. Where can I find if my institution or colleagues have had funding from an NSF program? There are a couple different ways to do this. First of all, you can go to your sponsored programs office, and they should have records of funding that has been received through the institution. Second of all, you can go to the NSF Award Search, which is a publicly available database of all projects that have been funded through the National Science Foundation. If you use the advanced search feature, you can actually put in an institution name and see if any awards have been made to that institution. You can also tailor or narrow your search a little bit by focusing specifically on those awards from the IUSE program. And the IUSE code number is 1998. So if you actually type in that program number, it will show you the institutions, if you have put in the institution name, that have received funding from that particular program.
The next question is, can a postdoctoral researcher serve as a PI? The answer is yes. The IUSE program does not define the roles necessary to serve as a PI.
Yeah, the caveat to that is you have to be able to serve as a PI, assuming your institution will allow you to do so. So if your institution will let you serve as a PI, the IUSE program will let you serve as a PI. So the next question is, can an external person do both evaluation and assist with research? Well, if they're assisting with the research, they are probably not an external person. They're actually probably part of the project team. We don't have a rule that says the evaluation needs to be performed by an external evaluator, and it can actually be performed by a member of the project team with relevant expertise. Some projects do think that an external evaluator is perhaps the way to go to provide them with the formative and summative feedback that they need. Other projects, for example, use an advisory board, and other projects will include an evaluator as part of the project team who can help structure the research and provide evaluation assistance throughout the course of the project.
The next question is, can you have both a research question and an evaluation plan, or is that trying to do too much? in the slides that it's been presented as or. The generation of new knowledge can be done either through a research plan or an evaluation plan. With a research-centered study, it's also helpful to identify the ways that you're going to make sure that it's carried out in a right manner. That does not mean necessarily that you need an external evaluator. As Ellen was just indicating, advisory boards might be helpful for you to make decisions as a research project is unfolding over a course of 3 to 5 years, depending on the size of the project. It is not too much to also have an evaluation plan, even with a research-centered project.
Okay. The next question relates to travel, and I assume this means travel that is funded through a capacity building program or capacity building project. The question is, does that mean we include the travel in our proposed budget for the PI but not the lodging? Also, is the summit scheduled to be in Washington, D.C.? Travel would include all costs associated with attending the summit. And the summit currently is scheduled to be in Washington, D.C. The tentative dates are June 9th through 11th, 2021. And I believe it's going to be scheduled at the Washington Renaissance Hotel. So that's the plan at the moment, to have the PI Summit next summer in Washington, D.C.
The next question is, how does the NSF define STEM? Does it include social sciences, psychology, pre-med? There is not a single published list of the fields of study that we support, but there are a number of things that you can do. Number one, just right off the top, psychology is a supported field, economics. In the social sciences, there is a division of social, behavioral, and economic sciences, SBE, and you can look at the divisions there in the fields that they support. So some social science fields are considered STEM fields in the NSF and others are not. So that's one way to do it. Also, in the solicitation, as Ellen indicated, there is a contact list for people by department, and that's another great resource. And I'm one of the contact people for social sciences. Those are two good approaches. Check the solicitation, but also looking at the support.
I want to point out NSF also specifically does not support biomedical research. That's the purview of the National Institutes of Health, and we typically don't support pre-professional students, and that would include pre-med students, although we would support STEM education as a whole, in which pre-med students would take part. Our next question is, do we need to address how our project will be carried out if a lockdown due to a pandemic or some other event is necessary at schools? This is actually a very good question. It's certainly a very timely question. What we have been doing at the moment is, for those awards that we are considering recommending, we are asking the PI team to provide us with a contingency plan that is related to possible effects of the pandemic. So you can propose the project that you would like to do, but what's going to happen if the pandemic changes your plans? So we do encourage investigators to propose a project as they would like to have it performed, but also to think about what might be some of the mitigating factors and what would change if, for example, a campus that is open all of a sudden closes again, or if it has to move rapidly to online education, as has already happened at least once.
The next question, this is another good one. One of the impacts of COVID-19 is putting all of our curriculum online. This has been especially tough in STEM disciplines, especially on students who lack technology and faculty who need professional development to hone their distance education skills. Could we use IUSE funds to provide adequate technology to low-income STEM students or professional development opportunities for STEM faculty in distance education techniques or best practices? This is a great question. One of the things that is central to the IUSE program is the generation of new knowledge. And so if there is a project that can constructed in such a manner that you have the potential to generate new knowledge, there's some flexibility in how the funds associated with an award can be used. Having said that, if the preponderance of the funds are used for equipment, that may make it difficult for you to study the curricular innovations, for example, or the development of courses. So the IUSE program is not a good source of funds for budget relief. The IUSE program is a great source of funds if you want to study innovative practices in this particularly difficult context. So that kind of work will have everything to do with the kind of project that you're able to design.
Okay, and I think we'll go back to our presentation now. We have a couple more slides here. We'd like to provide you with some resources that are available through the National Science Foundation that can help you with planning your program and getting information that you might need in order to put together a proposal. You also have access to these through the resources button as part of this webinar. So the program webpage address is given here. The current program solicitation is NSF 19-601. If you can't write down that URL in a hurry, if you simply Google NSF 19-601, you'll come right to the page. And if you're interested in looking at what's been funded by the program in previous award cycles, you can use the NSF award search function. You also have the opportunity to contact a program officer, and our names and contact information are available on the program webpage. And as Andrea mentioned, we actually all have a number of disciplinary and interdisciplinary specialties. So we have listings of those specialties and program officers whose knowledge and interests particularly align with those types of things. So if you want a physics program officer, for example, you could look for someone who specializes in physics education, engineering education, interdisciplinary, ICT, a whole bunch of different things. So we have lots of program officers with lots of different interests and expertise. A number of other resources include the NSF PAPG, or the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide, fondly known as the PAPG, which is the Bible for how to prepare a proposal. So it gives you all of the information about the specifics of the budget, the different things that go in different categories, all of the different pieces that you need to put together to put a proposal together. Another resource is the Common Guidelines for Education Research and Development, which is a publication prepared several years ago by the National Science Foundation to help provide some information and definitions about what actually constitutes educational research. We have a merit review webpage that provides an overview of the merit review, what the policies are, what the different components of review are, the different review criteria, how proposals are reviewed, and some other helpful information. And that webpage also includes a video that we show to all of our reviewers. It's also open to anyone who would like to take a look at it. It's called The Art and Science of Reviewing Proposals. And so it provides, again, some useful information that is provided to reviewers that can help you think about the types of things that they are asked to look for and that they would be looking for in a proposal that you would be putting in. And as Andrea mentioned, we have the EHR Core Research, or ECR program, is interested in fundamental educational research, and there is a solicitation associated with that core program on building capacity in educational research, and this is a solicitation for that. So it's NSF Building Capacity in STEM Education Research, or the BICSR program, and the BICSR solicitation. At this point, we'd like to thank you very much for your participation in today's webinar and for your interest in improving undergraduate STEM education. We do have a few more slides, as I alluded to at the beginning, that are specifically for those who are new to preparing NSF proposals. So if you've put together proposals and applied to NSF in past cycles, I would bet all of the information on the next few slides is already going to be familiar to you. So feel free to step out of the webinar at this point. Although we do have a survey that we would like for you to take that will ask you a couple of questions about your experiences with today's webinar. And I believe that's going to pop up on your page so you can access that survey. I'll give you a couple of minutes to think about that, and then we'll move into the next set of slides. Okay, so for those of you who have never prepared an NSF proposal, if you or your institution are new to the National Science Foundation, we'd like to provide you with a little bit of information and some nuts and bolts of preparing proposals for the NSF. So we'll talk about a few things here, and I know we only have about 19 minutes left in our allotted time, so this may run relatively quickly. As a reminder, this webinar and all of the others that we've given in this series will be archived for your access and use, so you can refer back to these, and we have gone through these sets of slides in at least one other webinar, so I know that there's one in the archives that you can refer back to if we don't make it through everything today. So NSF has a number of required proposal components. We'll talk about what those components are. We'll give you a little bit of information about what makes for a compelling proposal and what reviewers find very engaging about proposals that they tend to be enthusiastic about. We'll talk about the mechanisms for submitting a proposal and what happens to your proposal once it reaches black box at the National. So a number of elements are required in a proposal. There's a cover page that lists all of the relevant contact information for you and your institution, a table of contents that's populated actually as you fill out the application online. The two main elements that you need to really be concerned with are the project summary and the project description. So the project summary is a one-page overview of your project, and the project description is the 15 pages that you get in order to fully describe the project that you are presenting. The project summary is critically important because that's actually the piece of information that we rely most heavily on to assign your proposal to a particular review panel. So it helps very much to have detailed and concrete information in that project summary so we can best judge who will be the best reviewers for your particular project. If you are focused in a particular discipline, make sure that you mention that discipline. If you're focused on a particular you can provide a very general overview of the project itself, but again, if you're using educational technology, make sure you specify that's the technology. If you're focusing on faculty professional development, make sure that comes up in the project summary. You'll have additional space to include the references that you have cited in your project description. We require a biographical sketch from principal investigators and co-principal investigators, and there's a standard NSF format for that is described in the PAPG. We have budget pages that will populate with your budget figures, and that's usually prepared by your sponsored programs office. And you'll need to provide a budget justification that actually indicates the reason for each of those figures on the budget page. We ask for current and pending support information from all members of the project team, as well as a description of facilities, equipment, and other resources available to the project. Sometimes there is a request for special information and supplementary documentation. For IUSE projects, this would be where you would attach the letters of commitment that you've received from your collaborating partners and from others who will be providing resources that you will access as part of your project. We ask you to provide a data management plan that addresses 5 points about data, managing, securing, sharing, all of those different elements, and that's described more fully in the PAPG. If you're including postdocs in your project, there will need to be a postdoc mentoring plan, and this actually also applies even if the project PI is a postdoc. There should be a mentor who will provide a mentoring plan for that postdoc. And then you'll also be asked to list collaborators and other affiliations. And that's a document that actually does not go out to the reviewers. That's just for NSF internal use. So the project summary is critically important, as I said. It should be very specific to your project. It should include 3 things. It should include a brief project overview. It should include a statement of intellectual merit, and it should include a statement of broader impacts. And the statements on intellectual merit and broader impacts should be so labeled, so they actually have to be delineated within the body of the project summary. The project description is your 15-page chance to tell the reviewers everything they need to know about your project. And also, this project description has to contain a section on intellectual merit and a section on broader impact. And again, those should be sections that are labeled specifically intellectual merit or broader impacts. Within the project description, you need to provide a very clear statement of the work that you're going to be doing. You need to include the objectives for the proposed work and the expected significance of what you would like to learn from the project. It would be helpful to indicate the relationship of this work to the present state of knowledge in the field, so that will typically require some sort of literature review. as well as to work that's already been done by the project team and the PI under other support mechanisms, or perhaps under no support, that have just been done as efforts to improve STEM teaching and learning. The project description outlines the general plan of work, including the broad design of activities to be undertaken, and a description of the methods and procedures that will be used. Particularly data analysis methodology is really important to describe fully in the project description. This project description really addresses what you want to do, why you want to do it, how you plan to do it, and how will you know if you succeed, and what are we going to learn for and benefit from if you manage to complete this project successfully. Project activities may be based on previously established or innovative methods and approaches, but in either case, the methodology to be used must be well justified. Why are you using this particular thing in your particular project? So these issues apply both to the technical aspects of the proposal and to the way in which the project is hoped to make broader contributions to the field. The project description should also contain a section labeled Broader Impacts, and this should provide a discussion of the broader impacts of the proposed activities of the proposal and how they're actually going to be achieved. Unfortunately, my slide has gone very fuzzy, so I'm having a little bit of trouble reading what those bottom line elements are. So broader impacts may be accomplished through the research itself, through the activities directly related to the research projects, or through other activities that can be defined as broader impacts. NSF values the advancement of scientific knowledge and activities that contribute to the achievement of societally relevant outcomes. So these outcomes can be lots of different things, and that includes, as I've mentioned before, full participation of women and students from underrepresented backgrounds, improved STEM education and educator development, public scientific literacy, public engagement with science, developing a competitive global STEM workforce, all different kinds of things that we have talked about in regards to broader impacts. The project description, I want to give you a couple of hints. Brevity will assist the reviewers and the foundation dealing effectively with proposals. We give you 15 pages, and most projects will need to fill 15 pages with information. But if you can clearly and concisely describe what you're planning to do, that's of great benefit to the reviewers and can usually make them much more in favor of your particular project. Any visual materials that you include, that things like charts, graphs, maps, photographs, all of those have to be included within the 15-page limit. They may not be added as appendix material. And in fact, we do not allow appendices for IUSE proposals. So the project description must be self-contained, and URLs should not be used. You can put them into there if you would like, but there is no guarantee that the reviewers will take a look at the information that is linked in the URL. And again, no appendix material may be used to supplant the page limitation. We want you to be able to describe what you're doing within that 15 pages.
We've talked briefly about the elements of, or the importance of evaluation plan. I encourage you, if you're developing a proposal, to be working with an evaluator to help you formulate the evaluation plan. That is, to make sure that the outcomes that you have are tied in a clear way with the goals of your project. The ways that you're measuring things, if you're using survey instruments, if you're interviewing people, that the ways that you're measuring phenomena align with your goals, the kind of analysis that you're engaged in aligns as well. So again, starting from the beginning, that your project goals align with the intended outcomes, you're gathering data, you have forms of analysis that will enable you to answer the evaluation questions. Evaluation questions may inform your project as it unfolds. That is at the core, the difference between formative and summative evaluation. This slide is about Formative evaluation is when the chef tastes the soup. If you need to add cumin and lemon and salt and pepper, you can do that, and really dial in the flavors. Summative is when the guest tastes the soup. So in more perhaps meaningful way of expressing that is formative evaluation should enable you to make informed decisions as your project unfolds. So that if you see that you need to make a course correction in terms of the faculty development activities that you're rolling out, or in the curricular materials that you're developing, your formative evaluation should be set up in such a way as it's helping you to answer questions as the project unfolds. The summative evaluation is more about the entirety of the project.
Okay, and these are some ideas about what might make a proposal competitive. These are certainly things that we've heard back from reviewers in the past and what goes into reviews of proposals that have been highly recommended by the panelists and reviewers that take a look at them. Typically proposing an original idea, having a succinct but focused project plan. The idea can be expanded on. The project plan should include a realistic amount of work. And I have to say this is a mistake that often happens with investigators who are new to this particular program, that a lot of work is proposed when maybe a third of it would be actually realistic for the project plan. Reviewers are very good about teasing out what they think is a realistic amount of work. So it's great to be enthusiastic, but don't be overambitious. A sufficient amount of detail for project activities should be provided. And this is also a very common criticism of proposals that we see, that not enough detail is provided about what is actually going to be happening in the classroom or in the professional development experience, or the creating different types of environments. What exactly is going to be happening in those environments? Reviewers like to see that the project is cost effective and that there's not a lot of padding, if you call it, to the budget, that the findings will be of high impact and high quality, and that there is some knowledge and experience of the PIs that can contribute to the potential success of the project. This doesn't mean that there's no room for people who are new to the program or to PIs who have never received a grant from us before. But it might be to your benefit to think about including some sort of advisor or advisory board who has some more extensive experience perhaps in the field that can help guide your project as you're moving through it. Reviewers like to look at what the potential contribution to the field will be, the rationale and evidence of potential effectiveness. What makes you think that this particular thing that you are proposing is actually going to be effective and will work? Another thing that can make a proposal competitive is the likelihood of sustaining the work once the project period is ended, and the fact that there will be built into the proposal a chance for objective feedback and solid evaluation. And again, in some cases, it makes sense to have an advisory board. In other cases, an external evaluator or a member of the project team with evaluation experience can suffice to provide that component of a proposal. In preparing a competitive proposal, again, starting with a good idea is the first and best thing to do. So this can come from your own thinking about the classroom. It can come from reading of prior literature. It can come from things perhaps that you've experienced in a different environment or a different population of students. But starting with a good idea is perhaps the best way to start a competitive proposal. Communicating the idea clearly, addressing the two major review criteria, or the two only review criteria, both intellectual merit and broader impact, providing the research objectives and the questions, again, as well as plans for evaluation, having a solid and feasible plan for carrying out the proposed work, grounding in the relevant literature with appropriate expertise on board, again, through an evaluator or perhaps another project team member who's got experience that you can draw on to help you achieve the goals of your project. And another thing that can be very useful is to ask colleagues to read your proposal before you send it to the National Science Foundation. Get a couple of other sets of eyes on it so they can pick out things that don't make sense to them, could use more clarification, could use additional detail. All of that's going to be beneficial to you as you think about putting together a polished proposal for submission. Including strong arguments for the importance of the problem can be very helpful. Why is this particular thing going to be effective with your population of students? Making sure that the STEM content is clearly articulated with strong and solid and well-described examples can be really, really helpful in having a competitive proposal. Also providing appropriate and sufficient discussion of the research design and the methodology. What methods are going to use? Why did you pick that particular method? Providing a sensible chain of reasoning, linking what you know from the literature, what you have within your own experience, your process for developing the project, the questions that you'd like to answer, how you're going to collect data to answer those questions, and how you'll analyze the data to make sure that the questions have been appropriately answered are all very important elements of competitive proposals. And of course, the impacts of the research and development should be addressed within the project itself. A couple of tips, and we've heard this from successful proposers as well as from reviewers who've been looking at the projects. Start early. Think about this well in advance of the deadline. Make sure that you read the program solicitation very carefully. Another thing to do is make sure that you're looking at the current program solicitation. NSF does revise these solicitations and releases new versions periodically, so you want to make sure that you're actually addressing the issues and the things that are raised in the current solicitation. The solicitation in play right now is NSF 19-601. We've just finished our first year of this solicitation, and it will be active for at least one and possibly more than that years beyond this. You want to make sure that you also consult the Proposal and Awards Policies and Procedures Guide for the relevant and updated information. And this guide is also updated annually. The new version was just released on June 1st, 2020. It is NSF 20-1, but it provides all of the updated and current information about preparing and submitting a proposal. One of the new things from prior years is actually the structure of the biosketch and the ability to use an NSF template to prepare your biosketch. So instructions for that are in the PAPG. It would be really helpful if you test drive Fastlane before the deadline, the proposal deadline, as you're trying to submit your proposal, just to make sure that you know where the controls are and the different pieces are and how you insert the different parts of your proposal. There are several ways I should mention to actually physically submit your proposal to NSF. We strongly recommend Fastlane, which is our own internal system, as opposed to using grants.gov. Make sure your sponsored research office knows that a proposal is about to be submitted. Make sure that you follow the page limitations and font size limits for the proposal. That's the fastest way to get your proposal returned to you without review if you exceed the page limitations for the project description, for example. Make sure that you know about what others are doing in the field and make sure you've cited their work, particularly if they've published papers. Make sure they get cited in your project. Again, provide details, discuss prior results if you have them. Providing demographic information as part of that is also very useful. What does your institution look like? And what does the population of students that you'll be working with look like? Again, include your evaluation plan with specific timelines and benchmarks so you can determine where in the course of the project you are. Make sure that you've put yourself in the reviewer's place as you think about your proposal. And also, if you've had this proposal reviewed before, think about what the reviewers have commented on when you've received your comments back. Are there areas that they found unclear? Those, again, might be ones that you want to concentrate on in thinking about a revision for a new proposal. Make sure you have someone else read the proposal, do a spell check and a grammar check, meet program deadlines. If we say 5 p.m. in your time zone on a particular date, we mean 5 p.m. in your time zone on a particular date. We will not accept late proposals. Make sure you follow NSF requirements for use of human subjects, and that includes subjects that are just being surveyed for various purposes. And you can certainly call or email NSF program officers for guidance as needed. Again, as I mentioned, there are two options for submitting a proposal. We highly recommend using Fastlane. Fastlane will make sure that you have all of the necessary components of an NSF submission in place. If you use grants.gov, it's up to you to make sure that you've put all of those pieces in. Grants.gov will not prime you if you've left something out. So Fastlane will really make that check for you and make sure your proposal is complete before you submit it. Very briefly, this is what happens when NSF receives your proposal. First of all, we release a funding opportunity. In the case of the IUSE program, it's 19-601. You'll submit proposals to particular deadlines related to that solicitation. We receive the proposal. We then go through a process of selecting reviewers and assigning your proposal to a review panel. The proposal undergoes peer review for the two merit review criteria. And then it's assessed by a program officer, such as Andrea and myself, for relevance and for enthusiasm of reviewers and for a number of other criteria. We make our recommendation to the division director. You then undergo a business review to make sure your institution can accept an award, and then the award is made. From start to finish, actually from submitting the proposal, step 2 to step 7, typically takes about 6 months. If an award is recommended, it can be an additional few weeks beyond that. And I know at this point we're out of time, so I think we'll skip the questions for the moment. But thank you so much for your interest in improving undergraduate STEM education. And I believe that we're going to have a survey link pop up to ask you about your engagement with this particular webinar. Again, thank you for participating, and please make sure you use the resources we've provided, and we certainly hope to receive your proposals in the future.